Hello everyone and welcome to this virtual tabletop.io guided tour. My name's Andy Pymont. I'm an open source technology and board and card game enthusiast from Liverpool in the UK. I'm also a contributor to the virtual tabletop.io project, most notably in the public library, doing a few games in there, but I've also recently been doing some work on functions. What you're about to watch is a recording of a session that was held on the 27th of June on the Discord server for Board Game Geek's OG Guild. The session was advertised to people who played on the virtual tabletop.io platform but wanted to learn about edit mode, very much intended as an introduction, and I'll run through a more detailed agenda of what I'll cover at the start of the actual recording shortly. What you'll watch is a presentation followed by questions and answers. Just before we start, one quick apology. Unfortunately, I didn't mute Discord notification sounds on my system, so I apologise for the extra beeps and boops you'll hear during this. Hopefully they don't distract too much from the content. Thanks for watching, enjoy the video, and I hope you find it really useful. So in terms of what I wanted to cover today, people read the document, but if not, I'll go through it now anyway, is more about how the platform works from a sort of top level, very basic fundamentals that you can build extra learning on top of, and then in particular to go through where you can find documentation, tutorials, examples, things like that. So then where you've got those basics and you've got an understanding of where to go to look for help, that together should be a good start for people. So I'm definitely not going to be going into loads of detail in this session about like how you automate loads of things, or making a really complicated game, anything like that. We'll just go through very much the fundamentals. How does the edit mode work? Where are all the controls? And then where can you go to find more information? So I thought I'd start off by just going to what Virtual Tabletop is. So people probably know because a lot of us have played on it. Obviously, it is a really simple, excellent online platform where you can play games just by dragging pieces around the screen, and all players see all the changes at once. So really well suited to trick takers and games with low component counts. OGs we've found work really well on here. It is obviously a spin-off of playingcards.io. It's not the same people who are involved, rather playingcards.io is like the inspiration for Virtual Tabletop. So Virtual Tabletop is a sort of open source reimagining of playingcards.io. That made it particularly attractive to me because with it being open source, I think it might start off less polished, but it will, because more people can contribute and add all their ideas all the time. My experience is that can make for some really great things in the longer term. And I think that's starting to happen now. So if I'd done this session 18 months ago, the controls you had within the Virtual Tabletop interface for editing modules were not great, and now I think they're pretty great. So I used to do a lot of my work in a text editor, and now I do almost all of it actually on the platform. So I think this is a great time to be getting involved in making modules, but it will also get better over time because that's the nature of open source and everyone can contribute. Yeah, that includes you. So the platform is on GitHub and anyone can make a contribution. You can either sort of split off their version and do your own thing, or you can say to the people maintaining it on GitHub, here's a change that I've implemented, I want you to make it, and they can accept that change into the platform, which I've done. Now, if I'm saying that and you have not programmed in JavaScript before, which is what the platform is written in, you might think, oh, there's nothing I can contribute, but that is not true. Yeah. So because all of the documentation and all the sort of issue and bug tracking is also on GitHub, they're things that anyone could contribute. Yeah, so if you wanted to get involved, those could still be areas you could get involved in. So when I talk a bit later on about where is the documentation and where are the examples, if you see some documentation you think could be more clear and you now understand it better than the documentation, you could actually edit the documentation and make it better for other people. So that's another aspect that's there with it being open source. Yeah. So if you haven't used GitHub before, this is the main GitHub page for Virtual Tabletop, and probably the most useful bit actually is going to be this button called Wiki. I'm going to talk about it in a bit, but that's where they've put all the documentation on this project, apart from a little bit that is down here. Yeah. and then the but also interesting to look at can be the issues and the pull requests. So if you look at issues, this is basically anything anyone has reported as a problem in the platform, yeah, and this could just be used as an issue tracker and to track all the bugs that need to be fixed, yeah. So you can see like here, like it could be very specific things like, oh, there's something for the PCIO when you're importing a PCIO module, it doesn't work right. Great, that issue is tracked here. So again, if you find an issue, you can report it on here. In the pull request, you can basically see changes that people are proposing that are coming up in the future. So as it happens, a few of them recently are by me, but any change that someone wants to make to the platform, big or small, can be on there. You probably don't have to worry about that too much if you just want to make and play games, but that's where it is, just so that you know. Yeah. The other thing that's great is the wiki on here. So I'm going to talk about this a bit more in a minute, but this is basically your key place for all of the documentation, and particularly this developer documentation as well. We'll be taking a look at some of the pages there as I go through this, and that's going to be a key resource. So I think Nicholas mentioned as well before, a lot of the time he's asked me a question, and I've linked him to particularly this second page here in the developer documentation. And it is surprisingly good, and it can get better all the time because you could get involved and edit that if you wanted to, for example, and other people are editing it all the time to make it better. Now, technically, you can run your own virtual tabletop server if you want to. So you can follow the instructions here. You can actually run it on your own computer or on a web server that you get from an internet host or whoever, and you could run your own domain name or just on your private home network, a version of Virtual Tabletop if you wanted to. But obviously there's also the main instance, virtualtabletop.io. And then again, because this is all a community project, one thing I would say is there's the one main developer, this guy here, is currently paying most of the costs, but some of us do contribute, so you can also go to the Patreon if you wanted to just financially support it. No one's profiting off of that. It's just to cover the running costs for the main website bit. If you could spare a few of your local currency every month and you wanted to contribute, that's the option to do that. And again, I'd encourage people to get involved in that way as well. Yeah. So in terms of where to get help, there's going to be a few different avenues. One is this wiki that I've already covered. So I think this is some excellent documentation, and you can you'll get more familiar with some of these as we talk through some of the rest of it. There is also a series of inbuilt tutorials on the platform, which are available at the top of the game shelf if you change your drop down from games to tutorials. And there are a growing number of these. And again, these are things that people can contribute to help others learn and understand the platform. Yeah, and we'll go through them in a bit more detail later as well. So we've got the tutorials. We've got the wiki, which we already covered. There is also a virtual tabletop Discord server. That is, I believe, linked on the front page of the GitHub repository somewhere. Hopefully. Can I find it? Discord. There we go. So there's the link to their Discord server. If you're not on there, in particular, there's a help channel where you can just ask people for help. I'm one of the people who might help you out, but there's a few other users as well. So when you go to virtualtabletop.io, you will, as many of you know, if you just go to the website, you will be given an empty room with just a random 4-digit code. Yeah. And this already comes with everything that's in the public library, and you can also add your own games on here as well. Yeah. When you go to active game, this is effectively the room, and that's kind of the concept that was in PCIO. But Virtual Tabletop has expanded how much you can have within your room, so that you have got an active game, but you've also got your game shelf with all of your other games on it and preloaded with everything that is in the public library. Yeah. So if you want to play games that are in a public library, you can be in any room, it doesn't matter. If you want to maintain your own collection of games, including some in the public library and some not, you'll want to sort of move in and take ownership of a room. And that can be one of these, so I could just say now 4NZ9 is going to be my room, and I'll just note it down. Or you can actually just try and find a more personalised space by changing what goes after that. So as many of you know, I've got my own room, for example, and that doesn't have to be 4 characters long. You can make up whatever room name you want. Now, technically, anyone can edit that, so I would be careful to make sure if you're working on a game and it's not part of the public library, you keep it backed up, and we'll explain about how to save things to your local computer as we go on. But people sometimes get a bit worried about this, like, oh, how do I lock down my room? But in practice, I find it's not really a problem, and actually the platform being open is actually a lot more useful, because, for example, it means we don't need people to log in when you want to play a game with them. You just send them a link to your room. Yeah. So on the game shelf, you have all of your games and all of the tutorials available, right? You can also save games that are in progress now. So as well as having the sort of base version of Egyptian Epochs, if I want to start a new game, I actually saved a game during the latest OG Fest that Nicholas and John and I were playing, and there I can resume the game if I want to. So you can also kind of pack up a game you're playing and come back to it later if you want to. So you've got all of your games here. As I said before, you've also got all the tutorials, and you've got the same thing with the filters here. So if I was interested in, say, seats, I can search within the tutorial for seat, and then I can find the relevant tutorial. Yeah, and these will give you a sort of guided tour through some instructions and allowing you to experiment of some features of the platform. So they can be a really great way to learn. And if you haven't ever clicked on that section before of changing this drop down here to tutorials instead of games, then hopefully that's already a great thing to have learned today. So you can select any of these tutorials or games and pick to play it. So for example, perhaps I want to play a game of Egyptian Epochs. I pick to load this game, and that loads it into the room. Yeah. So then when I go in the edit mode to edit the room, it will be editing this current room that I can see on the table. Yeah. And any changes that I make will be reflected for other players straight away. I would need to save them before they will be captured on my table for future. So yeah, if I edit this game, I'm just literally editing the current contents of the table, and I'll need to save that somewhere, whether it's onto the game shelf or onto my computer, if I want to keep those changes. Yeah. So that's that. You could, so any game that you've got in your room, you can click on its entry on here. You can, from this menu, download a copy of it to your computer. You can also share a link to the game. So if you do this will give a link that anyone can then use in order to start a table of this game. So if I go there, you'll see they have an interface to create a new table. So you can even use that to share a game that you've made with someone else. If you didn't quite want to get to the point of putting it in the public library, or if you thought it wasn't ready yet, you could still send it to people to test by sending them the link from the share link part of the game's entry on your game shelf. Yeah. You can also favourite games that are in the public library. So you've got this white star. If you click on that, it will become one of your favourites and move up to the higher part of your screen. Yeah, and again, you can unfavourite it. So, and you can have a mixture of games from the public library and games that you're working on your table. If you've linked to one from someone else's room, so for example, this is a work in progress game that was shared on the VTT Discord server, it will have the little link icon as well to tell you. So basically anything with a star is from the public library, but I've just sort of promoted it to the top of my game shelf. The stuff with the paperclip is linked to someone else's room, and they've sort of shared their implementation with me. Yeah. The other thing that Virtual Tabletop did that wasn't in PCIO is within one game entry on the game shelf, you can have multiple what are called variants. Yeah. So with Egyptian epochs, what this has been used for is that the first one is the game that is similar to Ra, and the second one is a game that is similar to Razzia with the different tile mix. So if you've got two very similar things going on, you can have them as different variants within the same room. Within the same game definition, and then you can load either of them into your room by pressing play. Yeah, in the past, that was used quite often to provide a different variant for each player count. I now tend to do that only if there's very drastic differences in the game between player count. I tend to more automate the setup for most player count changes, and I use this for much more big differences, just because if someone's going to play this, it's a bit easier if they've only got one or two options here than like loads to pick from, in order to get the game working the way that they want it to work. Yeah. So you can keep these entries updated all the time with your changes. So if I was to go into here, if it's not a public library game, you can edit it, and you can edit any piece of information on this game shelf page, and you can also add new variants in that way. And if I click add variant, one of the options is to literally save the current room state. So that's one way of making a variant. If you wanted to just make a modified version of a game that was already there, you can edit the existing table to reflect whatever variant you want to exist, and then you can go add variant and save the current room state. Yeah. Alternatively, you can save the current contents of your room as a new game. So if you click add game, this is to add an entirely new game. And again, you could add the link that I showed you before that someone else has shared, or you could pick save room state in order to literally add a new game to your game shelf that contains whatever you've currently made in the active game section. Yeah. And by doing this, you can kind of, just like in a real life game room, you can keep your games organized on the shelf. You know, you've got all the variants you want of the game ready to play, and that's how you manage your space that you're working in. Yeah. So now we understand that top level. I'm just going to dip into a tiny piece of technical detail, which is if you download the file for Egyptian epochs, what you will see, this VTT file here is actually just a zip file, and it will open in your computer however you open a zip file. But what you will see in the zip file is you will see the same contents that we'll see in this folder. So you'll get a folder that contains the assets, which is basically all of the graphics and any sound files associated with that game, and then you'll get one JSON file for each variant in the game. So where we saw before that Egyptian epochs has got two variants, there will be two files here. So just if you ever do download it and you decide to look at the file, you'll see that's how the file matches up to what you see on the virtual tabletop side of things. Yeah. This JSON is a file format that's used quite extensively on the web now. It's a JavaScript object notation. It has a sort of format that you can learn, and again you can look for resources online about JSON or editors for JSON, and you can it'll all be familiar because this is not a virtual tabletop specific format. It's a standard file format. If you've written any JavaScript, you'll see it looks a lot like just how an object looks written in JavaScript code, and if you've written Python, it looks a bit like it's a massive Python dictionary. So if you're familiar with either of those, you'll be super familiar with this. If you're not familiar with that, don't worry too much, because I find I no longer really have to spend any time editing these files. I do all my work in the actual edit mode. But that's just to give people an idea of what's going on from a technical point of view under the hood. So when we look at an actual table set up in our room, almost everything you can see on the screen here is what is called a widget. Yeah. So a widget is the basic building block of everything that you see on a virtual tabletop table. Yeah. So a widget could be a card. So for example, this card is a widget. Yeah. It could be a holder, so each of the holders on this table are a widget. It could be a button. Everything is fundamentally a widget. And then there are also a list of all the different widget types on the wiki. Yeah, so if we have a look here on widgets on this page, it describes all the different types of widgets. So you can have boards, seats, tokens, writable objects, 3D objects, randomizers, timers, and decks. And then all the individual actual types under the hood are described here. So this is the building blocks that the room is made out of. So when you look at something on the table, it will either be one widget, like this card is, or it will be composed of multiple widgets. So for example, like this counter where we've got a 10 with a plus and a minus, effectively one object that the user interacts with has been created out of 3 widgets. Yeah. So sort of everything's a widget, if you like. And when we get into the edit mode in a bit, you'll see there's easy ways of selecting each widget and looking at all of its properties from the JSON and editing them. But that's just to give you an idea, is that the room is built out of all of these tiny little objects that you can that people can interact with. Yeah. So I'll now go into the actual edit mode, and hopefully if anything's been unclear from that, we'll start to get a bit clearer about how it actually works. So in the edit mode, you'll still see your table, but you now get a bank of controls across the top and down the right hand side of the table. On the right hand side, these are kind of extra pages of information that you can have open. If your screen is as large as mine is here, you see you get the table alongside the side panel. If you are on mobile or your window's only on half your screen, this right panel might obscure what's in the room. Yeah, but I'll now talk through these all these different controls, and it'll give you a bit of an idea of everything you can do. The actual best place to start, I think, actually is in the top right here, and this has just been improved very recently, actually. So the first thing is, with one click in the top right here, you can actually open a new tab containing the wiki from GitHub, which, as I've been mentioning, is where loads of the documentation is. So if you need to look at the documentation, you can't remember where this page was that I showed you, you can literally just click that question mark, and you're there. Similarly, you can click this button and it will give you the tutorials room on Virtual Tabletop, which basically it's just a second room. You just need to be in a second room and then you can go and look at the tutorials, right? So that again can help if you need to check something, and you can flicker back and forth between the two of them and copy and crib things together for this tutorial that you need in your room. Yeah. So that's a great start up there in the top right. I'll just talk through the rest of these controls. So firstly, in the top left, we've got start with a new blank room. So if you wanted to just make a completely new game, you could press this button and it would literally wipe the room. That wouldn't affect your game shelf because effectively the state of your room has been disconnected from the game shelf. But you could then edit that room the way you wanted it to and save it again to the game shelf or to your computer. We've got save the game. So you can either save it as your active variant. Now that is grayed out here because I'm looking at a public library game and we can't edit the public library for everyone just by clicking this button. But if you're in your own game that only exists in your own room, that button will be blue instead of grey and it will work. You'll be able to save your active variant. So whichever variant you loaded, that will save the state of your room there. You can save it as a new variant within the same game shelf entry. Yeah. You can save it as a new game on your game shelf. You can quickly download the file, or you can just quickly save it to the game shelf. So you've got all of those options just to save. You can also tick this autosave every 5 minutes. I don't tend to do that personally, but what I do is just save to active variant all the time when I'm working on developing a game, just because I'll break up the blocks of work. I'll think I'm going to work on this deck. Once this deck's ready, click save, then go on to the next task. We've got a light or dark mode for the right hand side. If that's too white for you over there, you can toggle that on and off. We can go full screen. We can put grid lines if we want to sort of start lining things up. So I could turn a grid on my screen if I want to. we can close the editor. So that's the sort of first bank of controls, largely stuff you would expect. There is an undo button. So if I had, for example, if I move this card, I can then undo moving that card and it's back in the deck. Yeah. This button here is toggles between drag to move, which is the same as how VTT works in non-edit mode. So if you drag something, it will move around. And drag to select, where you can drag a box around multiple widgets in order to select all of them. Yeah. My sneaky trick with this one is I tend to leave drag to select on pretty much all the time, but you can still click on things, like click the buttons and drag things by just using your middle mouse button instead of your left one. So like I'm dragging these tiles at the moment with my middle mouse button. If I use the left mouse button, I can do a multiple select. Yeah. We've also got a normal view and a zoomed out view. Now this could be quite useful because in some games what you might want to do is to hide something off of the screen. So if we look in the Floodplain Frenzy game in the public library, if you zoom out, you'll see that the board that is not in use for the current player count is hidden off the top of the screen. So if I wanted to go and edit that in the edit mode, I could do so. But that's what I do. It's just part of the setup. I basically moved the correct board into position and moved the other board off the screen. But by using this zoom out, you can kind of see anything that you or the person who's made the module have used that trick for. The playing area is 1600 by 1000 pixels, and you can always sort of clearly see it by using that zoom out toggle. You can kind of see where it is and position within that area only things you want users to be able to see and interact with, and you can hide anything else, including like holders that you might want to put things in that aren't being used. You can hide all that off the screen. So that's what your zoom's useful for. We've got add a new widget. We'll be talking about this one a bit more in a while, but you can just add something. And we've also got delete. So if we select one of these tiles, perhaps, we're putting it out, and then we select it, we can press the delete button and it's gone. I've just ruined this copy of the game. And then we've got some alignment tools that can help you align all the widgets. So, for example, align all their left edges. So if you've kind of positioned them like these player areas, and you wanted to make sure they all have a perfectly straight down the left-hand side, you can align them on the left, you can align them on their centre or the right, and the same vertically, and you can space things out. So this just helps you, rather than dragging things precisely into position and thinking, oh, is the space between this stack of tiles, this stack of tiles, and this stack, are the gaps the same? With the equalize, you can get them perfectly spaced out. And then similarly with this one, if your tiles are stacked like this, then you can use this button to instead stack them nicely like that. So these just help you do things that are a bit harder to do by hand, just dragging things around. Yeah. And then we've got groups, so you can group things and it'll create an invisible parent for those things. We won't worry too much about that now, but effectively it just allows you to create a group of objects. But I think that's probably a topic to dig into more as you get into more detail with things. On the right hand side then, we've got tabs. Let's say these have got a lot of extra information about things in your room. Yeah. So the first one is you can edit widget properties. If you just click on this at the moment, because I've got nothing selected, it just lets you add a deck. But if you click on something, you'll see it sort of gives you an interface to kind of change what it looks like. So it's like, this is which face it's on. So I can say, oh, I want that face down. Yeah. Or I'm not quite sure what happened there. Yeah, set it to 0 or 1 to change which face is visible, and so on and so forth. So that just lets you edit things in this kind of interface. Yeah. There's also, and this is the one I tend to use because I prefer to be a bit closer to the bare metal. I think it's really useful once you get to it. A sort of more detailed version of this is this curly braces tab, is to edit the widget's actual definition directly. So this is the same for the sort of definition of this one tile crop x4. for this one tile, this is all of its properties, and it's what you would see if you were looking at it in a text editor, but you can literally edit anything here. So I could even say, like, I want this to just be a bit lower down the screen, so if I change that to 500, it's just moved the tile, yeah? Or if I want it to go a bit to the right from there, I could say, well, I think I'll go 1450, yeah? As I mentioned before, the area of the play area is 1600 by 1000, so if I change this to something higher than 1600, it will be off the right-hand edge of the screen, and we can't see it at the moment, but I can just change it back to move it back in. So I find this page probably the most useful once you get used to it. If you're not used to looking at JSON objects, it might be slightly intimidating the first time, but I think the more you start to use it, the more you get a hang of it. It's also got really great context-sensitive controls down the right-hand side. So you'll see it sort of tells us any of the properties that a widget could have, right? So, like, you know, do we want to rotate this tile? We can just literally click this rotation. We've added the rotation property, and then we can just experiment with different values and see what it looks like. So again, this can help guide you in terms of what you could possibly change. And again, it's really context sensitive. So because I'm on the rotation number, it's giving me options for the rotation number. So it's like, oh yeah, let's double what I've got there, or let's set it to 0. And then the next set of controls are things that a card can have, and the next set are all the things that any widget can have. So it's the editor's very aware that I'm currently editing a card and is giving me the right information in terms of what I could change. Yeah. You also see the object you've got selected is highlighted in yellow. That you can toggle that on and off with this button, but it's quite useful while you're in the edit mode to see what you've got selected. The other great thing while you're in this edit the raw widget JSON tab is that if you hover over things on the table with your mouse, you'll see now on the right hand side I've got a list of everything that's in that position on the table. So if I go over this stack of tiles, you'll see there's loads of them, because obviously there's loads of tiles in that stack at the moment. But by pressing the F keys on my keyboard, I can directly select things by hovering over them. So hovering over that, I might say I want to edit the top card in that deck, so I'll press F6 to go into the first card. Or if I want to edit the deck, I can press F2, and then that's open the deck, and I can edit information about the deck. And we'll come back and talk about cards and decks in a minute, but like that's a really useful thing. You can go like, oh, I'd like to edit this button. You can literally hover over the button, and you'll see on the right hand side it's telling me where my cursor is, and it's saying the only thing under the cursor is a button, and I just press F1 to select that button, and I can edit anything about it. And again, with the context sensitive, it's cueing me in on things I might want to change about a button, like do I want to change the colour of it? Yeah. Do I want to change its border radius, so how curved the corners are? And all of these properties you can look up in the wiki if you're not sure exactly what they do, and all the documentation is there as well. So that's sort of, I find switching between probably this JSON one and the next one, the tree that I'm going to explain in a minute, is sort of where I spend most of my time when I'm editing. Once you get used to this, it's a bit more bare metal than doing this properties editing here, but I just find it's taking me slightly closer to what's actually implemented on this, and with this context sensitive help for all the properties I could add or edit, I find this really productive now as a space to edit things within a game. The one that I skipped over there, there's this history here. This is basically everything that's happened in the game, and you can undo to a certain point. This is a bit more experimental and quite new. I haven't really used it that much, but you've got, you know, the ability to jump back to a point in time. Yeah, so it dropped me out of the edit mode, but it's reverted all of my changes to that point. Yeah. I believe that edit history as well is only preserved as long as you've got the room open. So if you close the room, you won't be able to see all of those changes, which is why I recommend just saving your progress as you go along as you're working on a game, because that's how you'll actually permanently record things. I wouldn't rely too much on the history to help with that. The next view on here is a tree view. This lists every widget in the room, but it does display them as a tree, and that's particularly relevant like if there's a pile, so like the draw pile up here, we will see the draw pile like all the tiles that are within that pile are all organized together, so we can, the room's more organized here. If you import your room from PCIO, you'll find that everything just has a sort of made up ID number, which isn't useful. So one of the things I really like to do, that is the way I like to work, is to have everything named, because then it's very easy for me to find the right widget in order to edit them. Yeah. And that also powers this filter at the top. So, for example, if I wanted to know where every Pharaoh tile is at the moment, and I remember how to spell the word Pharaoh, I can type it in and literally filters everything in my room to where I've written the word Pharaoh in the ID reference for that widget. So when you look at a widget, I highly recommend that you name things so that you can find them later. So, like, literally in here, I've literally got all of the Pharaoh tiles with their own unique name, which is tile Pharaoh and then the number. So it just helps me to find them and edit them and know where all the widgets are in the room. So certainly for me, that helps me. And that really powers up this tree view. If you've named things, this is a lot more powerful. If you haven't named things, you can still use it to, for example, look for all the holders in your room, which is still pretty cool, but it's not as useful as if you've actually named all the game components and you're able to, like, type monument and see all of them. And from here, just click on any of them to select them. You'll see where it is on the screen, and then you can go and edit it. So I find that really useful. The next one is a debug. This is useful when you're doing routines, which we haven't really talked about yet, and I'm not going to cover in loads of detail today. But for example, on a button like the new game button here, if I click new game and say yes, this literally goes through everything that happened when I click that button and lets me see if there are any problems and exactly what operations were done. So that could be useful if you're automating something to have a look at how it works and what you need to tweak if you made some mistakes. And then you'll also have this assets page. Yeah. So in the case of this Egyptian Epochs game, all of the assets are actually from the virtual tabletop server itself, so there aren't any listed here. But if you've uploaded your own images, like your card images or whatever, or pieces, you'll see them all listed here, and you'll be able to manage them. And there's even a button to sort of compress them and try and make the file size smaller as well. And then finally, in this toolbox, the one thing you can do at the moment is, say you wanted to copy this new game button to a different table, you could literally select it, and then you could save that widget in your buffer here, and then you could go to another room and you can press put widgets into the game in order to drop a copy of it into that other room. So if you want to literally take something you did or someone else did in one module and just bring it into another one without copying the whole room and starting again, that's an efficient way to do that. So hopefully that gives everyone an idea of what all the controls are that are available in edit mode, and sort of now you know where everything is. You're probably not going to use all of them straight away, but it gives you a bit of an overview, and as I said, particularly in combination with having the links here now to the tutorials and the wiki. And as I said, most of my time I go back and forth between this tree where I can kind of say, all right, I need to edit all of my seats at the moment, so let's put seat in here, and I can make any, and then I can click on one of them to select it, and I go to this JSON view and I edit whatever needs to be changed. And that's sort of my main workflow when I'm editing things. I mentioned with the context sensitive in this edit mode, one thing to mention is if you look at a property that has got an image in it, you'll get the options. So here on the gold tile there's a picture of a metal bar. This is where the image is. I can replace that image with my own image from my computer by clicking this button, or I can click this button to pick an asset from the symbol picker, and this will give you this massive list of icons. This contains all of the emojis and everything from gameicons.net, which is a resource that a lot of us have been using anyway. So for example, that metal bar that is mentioned there, I can probably find, and it's this one here. So I could pick that and replace it. But say if I wanted to change all the gold tiles to show a coin instead, I could literally just switch to that one, and that's it. It's replaced metal bar with metal disc, and now there's a different image there. So that could be a really cool, easy way to change things from within this edit mode as well. So, two other slightly more technical topics that I just wanted to cover because, as I said, the main idea was to give people an overview, but just to sort of help people with where they may go next, is decks and then routines and functions. So, a deck is most often literally a deck of cards, but it can be anything where we want there to be a large number of similar or identical game components. Yeah, so we could use a deck for any case like that. So in the case of this game, Egyptian Epochs, we've got there are actually two decks in the game. One of them contains all these tiles, yeah, and the other one contains all the sun tokens. So because they're two sort of quite different pieces, I've got two different decks in the game. What the deck allows you to do is that you can have things defined within the deck that are then shared by all cards that are part of the deck. Yeah. And basically the way this works is that some properties that you specify in the deck, particularly in this card default section, are then given automatically to every widget that is part of that deck. Yeah, so if you've got a card that's part of this deck and it doesn't specify its own width, it will pick up this width. And if I change this width here, it will change the width of every tile in that deck. So if I change it to 100, they'll now be 100 wide. If I pull them out of here, we can probably see them. Or if I could change the way that I could change the background color to be, say, red, and we'll see straight away. So that's the icon on the back of the tile is defined by that color. So you can edit any properties in the card defaults that will affect everything in the entire deck. So what this means is when we look at an actual card like this one, the card actually only defines that it is a card, that it's currently in the draw pile, and that it's from this deck and it's this card type. And apart from that, nothing else is defined in the card. So if we looked in the actual file we downloaded, all of this information would be all that was there. And then these bits in red is just this editor helping us by saying, as well as all this stuff, this card effectively has everything from card defaults because it's part of this deck. And it also has all the properties associated with its card type. So what this means now is if we want to edit, like I said before, everything in the deck, we can just edit it once in the card defaults, and that will affect every card in the deck. And then the same for the card type. So like if I want this tile to no longer be purple, but instead to be red, I can literally change the color of the card type, and that will change all earthquakes to be red instead of purple. So it means rather than having to edit every single one of those tiles manually and make sure they all look the same, all the information can just be defined in the deck. And when you're looking at a card like this in the editor, there is a button to open the deck, so you can always go to the deck and have a look at how it's defined. The way this works is anything defined in the card defaults, every card has, unless the card specifies it itself. And then each card will also have a card type, and it also gets everything from its card type. The card type overrides the card defaults. Yeah. So if one of these card types said actually it's wider than the others, that would then change for that card type, but not for the others. And then also anything you specify on a specific individual card, like you would on any other widget, that will override its card type and the card defaults. Yeah. So that's just something to bear in mind. As I've been saying the whole time, what you'll want to do is to explore either other games that exist. Now I've shown you the edit mode, like have a look around and see how they've done things, and also the tutorials. And if we go in the tutorial for decks, we've got sort of 4 different tutorials that you can do that will talk you through the deck and the different properties. So the key thing to know is that if anything's defined in the deck, in the card defaults, that will be given to every card. If it's in the card types, then cards that specify that card type will get that as well. So it just stops you from having to edit, as I say, every single card individually. You can just edit the deck instead. You also, while you're in a deck, get that. If you hover over a card type, you'll see again this context sensitive editor gives you a few options. Like here, I can literally say, let's add a card, add one of these cards. Yeah. So actually, this is the one of the jokers. So I could easily, like, I could add a joker, then go, actually, I'll add 2 of those jokers. Yeah. Or I can remove them from here. So that can help you manage how many of each card you've got in your room, and you can also add 1 card of all 54 cards that are defined here just by clicking this, or indeed delete all the existing cards for this deck. So again, this when you're in a deck, the buttons that are available here have changed to reflect that context. The other thing I just wanted to briefly mention was routines. So a routine is something that can happen either when somebody clicks on something, usually a button, but you can put it on anything else. So we could even have it that when you click a card, a routine runs. Or it happens when a different property in the room changes. So for example, you could have a routine happen whenever someone moved this card. We could say whenever the Y value changes, we want this routine to run. In that specific example, I'd be careful about doing something like that, because then if someone's dragging it around, you'll be running your routine loads of times. But sticking to buttons is probably great as you get started. If you have a look at a button, you'll see it defines a click routine. Yeah. And then basically within these square brackets, we have a sort of different instructions. So first of all, it runs this instruction, then this one, then this one, and so on. And as I mentioned before, if you go into debug and you click that button, you'll see all of those instructions and you can examine exactly what happened. Yeah, and these are again all defined on the wiki. So like, what does set mean? What does move XY mean? These are all on the wiki, on probably the page of the wiki that I use the most, which is this function automations and routines page. And on here, you have all the things that you could make happen when someone clicks a button. Yeah. So you can make something rotate. You can make it move to a holder. You can make it move to a part of the table. You could shuffle a deck. Yeah. All of those options are available. And in here, you've got details of what things you can make happen. And you've got a link again back to the tutorial within Virtual Tabletop, where you can, like with this Dex tutorial, see it in action, mess around with it, see what properties are set in that room, and learn by experimenting. Yeah. So yeah, I didn't want to go into loads of detail on them, but that's just to give you an idea. It's called a routine. A routine's made up of functions, and that's where you'll want to go, is to that wiki page if you want to learn about them. I think that concludes everything that I wanted to cover. So does anyone have any questions?
For anyone who's watching this after the fact, they see a video, they start making a module, and their source of inspiration will be copy-pasting widgets or bits of text from other modules, right?
Yes.
They copy-paste a bit of text, and then suddenly the bit of text gets automatically deleted by VTT because they've never programmed in their life and they don't understand what's happening. So do you think it's pertinent to quickly cover the bracket structure of things?
Yeah, I mean, this editor again will help you out if you try and paste something in.
But it will also delete everything that's illegal automatically.
I think if you start typing here.
If you start typing, yes. If you click if you click something weird and you select another widget, it will delete everything it finds illegal.
Yeah, if I leave this edit now of this button without fixing what it's complaining about here, that change has not been saved. Yeah, so if you paste something in and you've got a red error on the right hand side and you then leave editing that widget, you will have lost that change. So you need to resolve this, and it has got a control space which takes you to the point where the error is. Here it's because I need to close the name of whatever property I'm writing here, right?
Yeah. In my use case, 3/4 of the time, it's because I've copy-pasted a bit of text that has brackets.
Yeah.
And brackets are not intricated properly. But I think that's a bit too advanced a topic. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, so you can see, like, hopefully with the syntax highlighting, it's relatively clear. But you have the name of the property and then you have the value. If that's some text, it needs to be in inverted commas. If it's a number, it can literally just be the number, and you then edit that property. So you end that property with a comma, yeah, and then the next one will start on the next line. If you something like this, a square bracket is defining that this property contains a technically it's called an array, but it's a list of different things in order. Yeah, so in this case of this click routine, the different items within the square brackets are all a different item in that list. Yeah, and then the squiggly brackets defines, just like it does around this whole widget, defines an entirely new object which has its own properties, and then again needs to be, all of those properties need to be written correctly and end with a comma, except the last one, and then it needs to end with the object ending with the curly brace being closed. Yeah, if you mainly use the context sensitive thing to like add properties, you won't you won't have it, because if you click like leave routine, for example, it'll add it open and closed for you, and then you can easily add things to it by just like clicking in here, right? But if you end up with like some speech marks or brackets unclosed in here, you will get a red error. You can press Control and Space to take your caret to it, and that will need to be resolved, or anything you've changed in here will not have been saved.
Okay, so maybe something about setting expectations. So let's take a fairly simple game. So I know there's a can't stop implementation on VTT, but let's imagine someone wanted to build a very simple can't stop implementation. Yeah. So no automation, just rolling dice, pushing your pawn up manually, and just telling the other person that it's their go. So no turn order automation or anything. So both for you as someone who is fairly experienced and as someone who would be new to editing VTT files, how much effort would you expect that to be?
If you just wanted to make one with an image of the board that you already had, like say you found a board that someone had redrawn already on BGG, yeah, it would be very straightforward then to make that game. But I find a lot of the work is if you want to make your own version, but that's almost getting into graphics editing territory rather than the actual VTT side of things, right? So if you wanted to make that room, I think you'd literally go, right, well, we'll start with a blank room, yeah. You would start by adding the board, which is just a basic widget, yeah, and you just set an image on that, and I would upload the board that I had, yeah, and then so on. I would just carry on from there. With this add here, you get a bit more of what things look like. So I could think, do I want to use a meeple or a cube for the pieces that move up the track? So if I pick a cube, I can click that. What colour do I want it to be? It gets added to the room. I can edit it as much as I want to. Yeah. So in terms of putting that together, like uploading a board that you already had, adding a few coloured cubes, and adding some dice, that would not take you very long at all. Yeah. And I would almost try and start with anything as simple as that, and then work your way up to more and more complicated projects as you go. So I wouldn't start with a game with like 250 unique cards and 4 sideboards and loads of scripting for your first one.
Yeah, so translating that into time, so I'd say maybe max 30 minutes for you and maybe 2 hours for a complete beginner.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, if you, as I say, if you already have the board, or if you're an amazing artist and you can draw your own boards, which is the bit that I struggle with.
Ignoring the graphics.
Yeah. So yeah, putting it together a few hours, and then you can play with it. Like you're sort of playing with it live as well, right? Like if you close the edit mode, you can, just experiment with things, and then you can jump back in the edit mode and change whatever you need to.
If it is your very first project, it might take you a couple of hours.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Andy showed that there are in the default widgets, there are default dice. They're just displayed as spinners. So it's very easy to get, like, in 1 minute, you just drag and drop 4 spinners on the board, and here are your 4 dice.
Yeah.
And if you don't care about very, very custom graphics, you can, like, drag on, Andy.
Yeah.
Show it what it is.
Yeah, so you can either have this, or you can have a dice in either of these 2 formats. So we could do this if we want to.
So if you don't care about pieces snapping into places and very fancy thing, and you just want to upload a board put 3 points per player, 3 saving points.
Yeah.
You just change their color quickly. Half of your work will be figuring out how to change their color, and otherwise, you could be done in 10 minutes.
Yeah, but once you get familiar with it, yeah.
But if you know where to search in the interface, you could be done in 10 minutes. Otherwise, it's just about uncharting how to do the thing.
Yeah.
And what Andy said earlier, can you do me one, Andy, and load my Caesar's Empire module? Thank you. Okay. This is a fairly complicated module. There are lots of pieces and they all snap in the little grayed out areas. I spend a lot of time programming the what happens when you push new game, etc.
Yeah.
Guess what took the most time? Drawing the stupid board. All the automation, all the everything. I don't know how to program. What took me the longest is drawing the stupid board.
Yeah.
On your first project, please have a picture of a board already ready, or do a card game or something. But anything with very minute details about spatial orientation, unless you're a graphical artist specialized in the kind of things, don't. The biggest hurdle is not virtual tabletop. It's like drawing a board by yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, because this is, hopefully, the idea was just to give people an idea of where to look in this editor and the fact that it can guide you as to which properties are there. And again, the help is there. So I think there's a lot more than people realise that you can then, copy and paste things together from the tutorials and different games. It is surprisingly easy to get things working, as Nicholas says.
Yeah, so Martin's question is, so what's the best way to create a deck of cards that has a simple pattern of suits, numbers, symbols?
Okay, yeah, great. So, again, we'll start with a blank room. If we have no widget selected, we have add deck straight away in this top properties one. So there are two options here. So one is you can upload one image per card. So again, if you've already got all the images for your game, you can do this option. Or if you want, like Martin said there, just some simple symbols or colors and ranks, we can pick this option. We then pick which symbols we want. So maybe we don't take the kind of the default suits, but we'll do these 3 suits. Yeah. We can pick which color we want them to be. And then we can also specify which ranks we want. So maybe we're just going to have 2 to 10 in each one. So at the moment this is ticked, so when I changed it changed for all of them. But if I untick it, I can make purple maybe be 1 to 5 instead of 2 to 10. Yeah. And then what sort of card design do I want? This is literally just transparent cards, which is why it doesn't look so great. But the others don't look too bad. So maybe I want this one this time, right? So we'll take that, and that's literally added that to the game now. And like I was talking about before, if you look at the tree, what you'll see is we've got a deck, and then we've also got each card. So each card is a widget, but a lot of their properties will be defined in the deck, and that's how simple it is if you wanted to create them. If you want to change the symbol, then you would just go into the deck, and then within the card types we can see they've got like their suit symbol defined as this biohazard, so we can literally change that to a different asset by, if we highlight it, we get pick an asset from a symbol picker, and we could change it to a different thing instead of that hazard symbol. And if you're making a traditional card game where you literally just wanted the traditional cards, the other option is from within this add a new widget option. The standard deck of cards along with a recall and shuffle button is over here on the left hand side. That will create the 52 cards. It doesn't create jokers, but the jokers are defined in the deck, so you can just go and add a few copies of them from editing the deck.
Okay, and from the other option of adding one image per card, so I take it if you want custom cards, that is something where the format is a bit different from TTS, so that you have individual images, not images for the entire deck.
Yeah, there is a TTS import feature on the platform that will import a deck in the TTS format. Yeah. But that option has not yet been added to that interface I just showed you for the decks, but I expect it will be at some point in the future. So if you go to add a game here, there is a TTS import. Obviously, TTS rooms can be very large, so perhaps not everything will import well, but your decks should come in, and then you can continue editing it as well.
I think it's at the bottom, isn't it? The bottom.
Yes, it's you can say, but yes. So you put the workshop link in there. That's what you do. Yeah. So yeah, it doesn't bring in the automation because the automation is written in a completely different programming language in Lua in Tabletop Simulator, but it will bring the widgets across. So any sort of tokens and decks of cards. Yeah. But yeah, for the general deck, if you just adding it from the edit mode in here, you'll want one image per card in order to do that option.
And then I think I'll lend my voice to Martin once again, because we have another question in the chat. And I will use that opportunity to tag on a second question from my end.
Okay.
So first of all, the question from Martin is, so when you added the deck of cards, they are all spread out face up. How do you make them stack up at a particular place? And I would use this opportunity, since you referred us to the wiki so much, maybe you could walk us through, if we have this question, how would we find the answer in the wiki?
Okay, so the way I would look at this question is, what we're saying is we want somewhere for these cards to live during play. So perhaps that's a draw pile or a discard pile, something similar. So if we familiarise ourselves with the page on widgets on the wiki, we'll learn about the different types of widgets on the platform, and the particularly relevant one here is holder. So a holder is a marked area where you can put cards. So this is something you'll be familiar with perhaps from playing. You'll have seen these little white boxes that cards snap to, so we can easily create a holder in edit mode. We just use add, and they're here on the left hand side. We just can easily place that in our room and position it. As I said before, I like to give things a good name, so let's call this holder draw. Perhaps it's going to be our draw pile, and then what we could do is simply drag the cards into there. Not even needing to use the edit mode, we could just use the standard playing interface to do this, and it won't take too long at all. Now, of course, what might happen is you might want the cards to be returned to this holder regularly during the course of play, so perhaps you need to return them here after every hand or every round of the game. So in that case, as I said, I'm not going into too much detail today about routines and functions, but what I would do is to create a button with a click routine. And then again, if we consult the wiki, and this time we look at the page on functions, the two relevant functions we could look at, and you'll use one of these, is either move, which is the sort of more flexible function for moving widgets into a holder, or recall, which lets you move cards back to the holder they are related to. In order for Virtual Tabletop to know that this deck is associated to this holder, we just need to edit the deck and set its parent to be the same draw holder that we just created. And now they're associated, you'll be able to use the recall function on the click routine on a button in order to create a button that will return the cards regularly to that holder during play.
How easy is it, because you were doing it before, how easy is it for you to just edit the text directly? You would just open it up in a text editor like VI, for example?
Yeah, exactly. So if you download the file, it will look just like it does in that JSON view in the edit mode, except you'll kind of see everything in one big list. Yeah. So like if we go into the code and we'll go to a game that I actually know quite well, then at the top you have sort of the information about your game that you can see on the game shelf. Yeah. So like, what's the description, what's the name, the image that's on the game shelf. And then after that, it's literally just every widget is in this file, right? So you can then just find them and edit them. That's what I used to do. Oh, I've accidentally started editing that. So that's what I used to do in order to edit a game. But now I find with this, since they added this advanced edit mode where you can literally edit the JSON of one particular widget, I find it much easier to just do this now. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I used to be a programmer, but I was always I could never ever get used to tools to help me. I always had to just code directly in order to understand everything.
Yeah, yeah.
So I just want to make sure I had the option of just editing the text directly.
Yeah, you can edit the text directly. As well, what I would look into there is running the server on your own computer as well. Because if you run it on your own computer and connect via localhost, you can edit the game definition in the public library, and it'll live reload the changes in your web browser. So you can. That's probably the smoothest way, I think, at the moment to do that workflow. So starting with the instructions on the wiki for running it on your own computer in debug mode. And then edit a public library game, while you've got localhost open in your web browser, and you'll be able to see the changes reflected. So anytime you reload the game from the game shelf.
Right, like if I was editing directly on VTT and the room updates automatically with the change. That's how I would do that locally.
Yeah, if you do it locally, you could basically effectively add the game to your own copy of the public library by just making a folder in that library folder, and then it will appear in here. Yeah, and then you can make changes in your text editor, and then click the game on here and click play, and the changes you made in your text editor will be displayed on the screen. So if I was going to go back to working in a text editor, that would be the workflow I would use now. But as I say, I think the combination now of being able to move things around and then also like find them in this tree and edit them, for me, has got to the point where I now prefer working on the platform. Because also, like, if I get a card out of here, and like if I'm positioning a widget on the screen, like I can literally drag it around with this and work out what and then maybe I go, well, I would call this 970 350 as its position, right? And the combination of being able to see the change and effectively have a text editor on the right hand side of my screen has got to the point where I now find this my preferred way of working. But there are absolutely other approaches you can take if you want to work in a different way.
So maybe the final question for me is something that I think is a bit too advanced for right now, but what might again be a good hook for where will I find this when I want to look it up later on the wiki. So a lot of games have, of course, hidden player areas or hidden hands. So
yes.
How would one either go about setting those up if that's trivial, or how would one go about finding how to do that from the wiki?
Yeah, so is there a tutorial that relates to that? Let's have a look. So see, a lot of these are about button functions. Is there something about holders? No.
Alphabetically, just before hands.
Oh yeah, with hands with custom visibility. There we go. Thank you, Nicholas. So again, this will sort of show you through things around. So, like if I join blue here, I can no longer see red, for example. And then there's a reset button, or I can join red and I can no longer see blue. So you can kind of have a look at things like that. So you would basically set up each, in this case I think it's 2 teams with their own hand, but you can still have 1 hand per player in different parts of the table and have some of them visible or not to each other. You've also just got the normal default hand, right? So if you, in the edit mode, just add a hand, which is somewhere around... Have I gone blind? Oh, up here, add hand. So if you add a hand, by default, that is an area that you'll have seen in lots of modules. It's normally at the bottom of the screen, where everything in here, because of this children per owner setting, is each person sees their own stuff there and not anyone else's. But you can have multiple hands in different areas of the screen if you want to, that all work in that same way. It's ultimately just a holder that's called hand with this property set. But yeah, I would go through the hands tutorials, and then you can just add them to the room and experiment with them. Okay, so that concludes today's talk. Thank you to everyone who attended and asked interesting questions. I hope you found it useful and that it helps to break down some of the barriers for getting involved on creating and editing games on virtualtabletop.io. Thanks for watching.